Hello and welcome to the PFF Wire podcast. I'm Doug Kyed, joined as always by Brad Spielberger. Brad, how are you doing on this Friday afternoon?
Doing well, because as much as Zach Taylor tried to kill our Bengals team total over 26.5, he was not able to defeat us. We beat him by the hook, so I'm doing pretty well today. How about you?
Absolutely, I'm doing fine. Just off the top here, make sure to subscribe to the PFF Wire podcast on Apple, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. Drop a review in there as well, as if you don't want to watch us on YouTube. But let's start off by talking about last night's Dolphins-Bengals game. And obviously, the thing that everyone has to talk about is the Tua Tagovailoa injury. We saw him on Sunday hit his head against the turf. He got up stumbling. It appeared at the time that he had a concussion, because the Dolphins even announced that he was going to be, evaluated for a head injury. He wound up coming back in that game. It was reported that it was actually back and ankle injuries. Then you fast forward to Thursday. He takes another big hit, this time very clearly a concussion, misses the rest of the game. And the question here is whether the Dolphins should have put him on the field at all on Thursday. That's a very fair question. I think that my biggest takeaway here is that the concussion protocols need to be amended in some way. That if you see a guy hit his head against the turf, get up stumbling, that should probably be, immediate grounds for taking him out of the game, not allowing him to continue. But this all comes down to the team physician and an independent neurologist, and those are ultimately the people who allowed Tua Tagovailoa to come back into that game on Sunday and then to also play on Thursday.
So you mentioned there are some instances where it should be an automatic exclusion from the rest of the game, and there's actually a checklist that's called the no-go symptoms and things that happen, and a lack of balance is on that list. And I think what you saw from Tua Tagovailoa on Sunday in Week 3 would qualify, but you're allowed to override that, I suppose, and pass the test and get through it. We had Andrew Whitworth, who played into his age 40 season for the Rams, talk on the broadcast about how he was able to overcome the test and get back on the field, even knowing he probably was concussed. So I think it should be automatic, to where if anything looks that way, you're just automatically out. We exercise caution. I will say it has been interesting. T. Higgins looked like he got concussed last Sunday as well. He took a nasty hit in that game against the Jets, hit the back of his head on the turf, and obviously had a phenomenal game last night, was probably the top receiver for either team. So it needs to be happening all across the board. But I do think Tua's was really bad, where it just seems so obvious. And then the inevitable, awful outcome, that fencing response last night, just hard to watch.
And I think that, the Dolphins have been very insistent that Tua Tagovailoa did not have a head injury on Sunday. Clearly, at this point, that's what they're going to have to say. The NFLPA is investigating this. I would even say that, maybe putting him out there with the back injury, if it was bad enough that he was stumbling on the field on Sunday, I think it's certainly possible that a back injury could force you not to brace on a hit like the one that he took well, and that, could have had something to do with the fact that he took that hit so hard. But ultimately, I think that, it's tough to blame this unnamed faceless doctor, or these two doctors who ultimately are the ones who allowed Tua to return to the game on Sunday and then allowed him to play on Thursday. But I know that Mike McDaniel is the most forward-facing employee on the Dolphins, and that it's very easy to blame him for allowing Tua to play. But I don't know. I mean, if doctors are saying that it wasn't a head injury, which is clearly the case with the Dolphins organization right now, if doctors are saying that Tua could return on Sunday and that he could play on Thursday, I thought that Mike McDaniel made a decent point on Friday today during a news conference. It said, when he was saying that, if a doctor is saying that he can play, then at what point would I allow a player to play if it's up to me? Because these guys are always dealing with injuries. Head injuries are part of football. I'm of the belief that Tua should not have finished that game on Sunday because of the hit that he took to the back of his head, and that he probably also should not have played on Thursday because of that as well. But it's tough for me to blame the player or the head coach if this situation's being put in their hands. I think that it needs to be taken out of their hands to begin with.
Yeah, I mean, players have every incentive to get back out there. It's the unfortunate reality of the situation, both in the interim of when it's happening and also just long term, to not be labeled as a guy who suffered from concussions when it comes to signing contracts and stuff like that. So I also think, last point, you made a great point pre-show that McDaniel has to be the face because they don't have an owner right now. The Dolphins are currently ownerless, and I think it may even play into I remember the last time a different coach, and John Harbaugh said he was astounded that Tua Tagovailoa was able to play on Thursday. Yeah. Most coaches won't even talk about their own guys' injuries. Right. I found it interesting and notable. He actually commented on another team's injury. I think that kind of says a lot.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I mean, most teams, you'd have the owner out there maybe talking about this, or maybe he's the one who might get final say on this. Stephen Ross right now is suspended due to the tampering investigation. So, this comes down to, Mike McDaniel, the GM, other top people but ultimately it comes down to the doctor, and the doctor is the one who has to approve this. And I think that that's probably where the blame should lay on this. We'll see what the NFLPA finds in their investigation. Some breaking news as we're recording this show: Mac Jones officially out on Sunday against the Green Bay Packers. This was an interesting situation because I was told on Thursday that, then that was after a lot of these reports had come out, that, it was possible that Mac Jones was going to play, that he was pushing to play. I was told on Thursday that a person within the organization would be shocked if Mac Jones wound up playing in that game. And that is, that was the right tell here, because Mac Jones is now out dealing with a high ankle sprain. I wrote today in a mailbag that Tom Brady actually played on high ankle sprains multiple times for the Patriots. Once was in 2008 for the Super Bowl, the undefeated Super Bowl that they were playing against the New York Giants. And he played on a high ankle sprain again during the 2015 playoffs. But, obviously those were both playoff situations with Tom Brady, who's played through a million different injuries in the past. With Mac Jones right now, he's a young quarterback. He's more mobile than Tom Brady. This is not a playoff game. This is a game that the Patriots probably would lose regardless of whether Mac Jones is playing or not. So I think that this was definitely the smart decision to take it out of Mac Jones' hands, say, you're not playing, rest up. Brian Hoyer will play on Sunday, and we'll see when you can come back.
I think it was probably mostly gamesmanship, just making the Green Bay Packers stay honest and study both quarterbacks. And, I think interesting thing is the Packers have been susceptible on the ground. I agree with you. It's probably not a game they're going to win, but they can try to use that running back committee and just keep it kind of like that Buffalo game in the terrible weather last year, where you don't even complete a pass and try to win that way. But yeah, it seemed crazy that he was trending towards maybe playing. I think it was probably a little bit facetious from the Patriots.
Yeah, and I thought the messaging out of Foxborough was so strange all week, where Mac Jones on Monday was saying that he was day-to-day. He said that about 11 times, I think, during the press conference. Bill Belichick, I think, said it even more on Wednesday, where he was kind of doing his usual on to Cincinnati shtick, this time going with day-to-day instead. But he was doing it with a smile on his face. And then today, during his news conference, he went on a pretty long historical diatribe about the Green Bay Packers off the top. He went into Don Hudson and how the NFL draft was actually formed because Don Hudson had agreed to sign with the Giants and the Packers. It was like this 10-minute, 5-minute long thing. And then finally someone was like, is Mac Jones going to play on Sunday? And he smiled and he said, well, we'll see. And he just kind of made a joke out of it again. So, that was probably more gamesmanship, getting the Packers to prepare for a couple of different quarterbacks. But one thing I thought was funny, I forgot who exactly reported this, but it was that the Patriots were going to have two different game plans, one for Mac Jones and one for Brian Hoyer. I don't know if you necessarily need two different game plans. They're not that dissimilar as quarterbacks.
Yeah, I don't think the playbook is super different depending on which guy's out there. I don't think the option was getting removed because Mac
right.
Jones is not playing.
Let's obviously we kind of had to jump in and talk there about Mac Jones for a little bit, but did you have any other major takeaways from the Dolphins-Bengals game on Thursday, since that's still fresh in our minds? I think that it's kind of a tough game to evaluate since Tua did leave early in the game, but at the same time, the Bengals are now 2-2. They're looking a lot better than they were 2 weeks ago.
Yeah, I do think it is hard to take away narratives for either team, but I will say something I found interesting, and we had a commenter here mention how the turnaround to Thursday is not long enough, and maybe this has something to do with what I'm about to talk about, and that's pregame. Before I was looking at some stats, and Joe Burrow is very, very good against cover 0 and cover 1, which means either no safeties back or one safety in the middle of the field back. He's the 5th highest PFF passing grade the last 2 years, and is second in yards per attempt at 10 yards per attempt against that coverage. And I was putting this out on Twitter, and someone responded how the Dolphins actually against Josh Allen played a ton of too high, had a lot of too high safeties, did a lot of different things, and that actually played a big role in them winning the game. They did not do that last night. Even after Xavier Howard went out, their top corner, who was basically on an island, they then had, undrafted free agent depth corners still playing those roles. I want to say I don't think our charting is done yet, but they may have played even more cover 0 than their typical, per game average. And it led to a lot of deep shots down the sideline to T. Higgins and Jamar Chase, Tyler Boyd. I guess that was kind of just a blown coverage, but nevertheless, that also, I'm guessing, maybe has something to do with the short week that Miami had to stick to their bread and butter. They could not install or run a ton of reps of a different look, even though they did just use it the previous week against Josh Allen. But, just found that interesting that they stuck to what they are used to using, and Burrow kills it. And he didn't even play that well, but had enough chunk plays that his numbers look great just because he had a bunch of explosives.
Yeah, Joe Burrow went 20 of 31, 287 yards, 2 touchdowns, no interceptions. And yeah, I think that you're also maybe seeing from that Dolphins defense right now where, Xavier Howard comes out of the game with a groin injury. You don't have Byron Jones. That cornerback depth is already being tested. And these aren't a ton of experienced players that are in there as well. So if you're asking them to go from cover 3 to cover 2 to cover 1 to cover 0 to cover 6 on a play-to-play basis, that works when you've got 6-year vets out there, and it works probably with the safeties that they might have on the field, but certainly not with a lot of the young cornerbacks that they're having to put out there. But yeah, definitely a strange decision to go with so much man coverage, given that tested depth at cornerback for the Dolphins. They'll be in much better shape if they can get Xavier Howard and Byron Jones back on the field together. But now Byron Jones eligible to come back. Xavier Howard clearly dealing with that groin injury. So we'll see when they can actually share the field together. Another big takeaway from me in that game is just how rough of shape the Bengals rushing attack is. I mean, Joe Mixon, he had a really nice bounce back season last year where he wasn't as good, dealt with some injuries in 2020, was very good last season. I think that this is an issue that's kind of twofold for the Bengals right now, is that the Bengals offensive line is not getting a good enough push for Joe Mixon to actually work up to anything. And then he's also not doing a good enough job of creating plays after contact. So not only is his yards before contact way down, his yards after contact are way down right now too. Only had 61 yards on 24 carries, a long rush of 7 yards, and the touchdown that he had, it took the entire offensive line to push him over the goal line. Teddy Karras came in there at the end and just kind of shoved the whole pile forward. It's not like that was some impressive 10-yard run or impressive gallop that he had there. It took the entire team to get a push there. So I'm not sure if it's the offensive line not gelling right now, if it's going to take a while for everything to come together, if it's some injuries that a guy like La'el Collins is dealing with, but that rushing attack is just rough right now.
Yeah, it's awful. And look, we're not trying to say we're smarter than head coaches, but last night was crazy to where you're literally getting 2 yards a carry every single time. We talk about the Bengals taking so many sacks. Yeah, when you have 2nd and 8 every single possession, and then 3rd and 8 a lot of the time, you're going to take a lot of sacks. And they actually didn't last night, but just not putting the offense in a position to succeed whatsoever over and over and over again. I mean, they could have lost to Teddy Bridgewater at home. With all the injuries Miami had, they still easily could have lost that game without that late interception for Von Bell, his 2nd of the game. It was mind-boggling.
Absolutely. Let's get into some injuries from around the NFL right now. As a reminder, there is a 9:30 a.m. Eastern London game. For all of you West Coasters, have fun waking up at 6 a.m. to catch some Saints and Vikings football. I think that I would probably do that. I'm that sick in the head about football that I would probably wake up at 6 a.m.
Andy Dalton with breakfast?
Absolutely. I love it. But yeah, as you just alluded to, Jameis Winston doubtful for that game against the Vikings. So Andy Dalton likely going to be the starter for the Saints in London against the Vikings, but he will be without Michael Thomas. Michael Thomas has been ruled out for that game. On the Viking side of the ball, Dalvin Cook will be playing against the New Orleans Saints, but I'm a little curious to see how Andy Dalton looks, even though he will be without Michael Thomas. That Saints offense has just been rough so far that I'm curious to see if Andy Dalton can make it look a little bit better. As I mentioned, being without Michael Thomas, that certainly hurts, but this could become a quarterback controversy if the Saints offense plays well in this game.
Yeah, I mean, the pass block unit is currently ranked 6th per our grading through week 3, so they've been holding up, in terms of that. It's the issue is Jameis Winston's average at the target is 12 yards. Andy Dalton averaged I looked at it earlier today. I want to say like 7 yards, like almost half his average depth of target throwing the ball down the field. I don't think he's better than Jameis Winston, but the loss of Michael Thomas is huge because I would argue some more underneath passing, hitting Jarvis Landry, who's also not 100%, and Alvin Kamara in the receiving game, getting him going in that facet, which has not been the case so far. Also, some more underneath passing against a very susceptible and just not good, back seven for the Minnesota Vikings, I think would be a potential winning strategy. But a lot of injuries, a lot of losses there. Andres Pete, their left guard, also not playing in the game. But they could. I mean, rookie Chris Olave has been obviously a phenom so far. He could beat this very vulnerable Vikings secondary. Maybe a controversy is possible. It's an interesting thought, no question.
Jarvis Landry also has been playing relatively well early this season. And, the Saints adding all of that wide receiver depth after how depleted it was over the last couple seasons with Michael Thomas out has certainly helped. Some late breaking news here. We've got Keenan Allen out again on Sunday against the Houston Texans. Justin Herbert has been practicing in full, so certainly looks like he'll be out there. But, I mean, this injury bug is not going away for the Chargers anytime soon right now.
Yeah, it's tough, too, because he practiced in a limited capacity yesterday, and then there was a report that at the end of practice or near the end of practice, he left early with a trainer. I would imagine he had a setback, and this is the issue with hamstring injuries a lot of the time. It's such a tough injury to not re-aggravate. And again, we're not doctors, and I don't know this for sure, but I'm guessing that's what happened there. It's a notable loss. I mean, Josh Palmer and Mike Williams were pretty productive last week against Jacksonville. Or they were not productive, I should say. Excuse me. And now they have a Houston team that, yes, not a juggernaut, but a good young secondary with guys like Derek Stingley playing well. The Chargers need to win this football game, and it's tough without Keenan Allen.
It definitely is, and I was trying to bring up the odds up real quick. Last time I was looking at the AFC South, who's going to win the AFC South odds. The Houston Texans were plus like 3,300, something like that, I think. And I'm sorry, I'm wasting everyone's time here. Okay, the Colts are plus 105, Jaguars plus 220, Titans plus 280, and the Texans are plus 3,300, which I don't know. I mean, if they beat the Chargers, those odds are going to be shortened significantly. I'm not sure if this is a smart bet or anything to make there, but it's just something to watch. That that division is so wide open right now that I'm kind of shocked at how high of underdogs the Texans are, because I do feel like a win over the Chargers would maybe change some people's minds about them. We'll see what actually happens there. Some other late breaking news here. Amon-Ra St. Brown out for the Lions against the Seattle Seahawks. We've got DeAndre Swift also out against the Seahawks. And then on the receiver side for the Lions, DJ Chark, questionable. Josh Reynolds, questionable. Then the expectation is that both those guys are going to play. But Lions offense has looked really good through the first 3 weeks of the season, despite the fact that Jared Goff hasn't played exceptionally well. Amon-Ra St. Brown is a massive hit to that offense, though.
I mean, truly one of the bigger losses. He's the wide receiver 5 in fantasy football right now, half-point PPR. It's a huge loss. They have the most offensive touchdowns in the NFL. They're tied with Lamar Jackson. I think we talked about that. But a top 5 offense in EPA per play. They've been playing very well. He is a massive loss, and I still think Chark, against a vulnerable secondary is probably a good play. The Seattle Seahawks are dead last in EPA per drop back allowed. So a vulnerable secondary and a team that can be beaten through the air. But like you mentioned, he's also not 100% himself with his own ankle injury. So maybe a TJ Hawkinson game. You never know when he's going to break out and have a huge game. But yeah, that offense, you cannot expect them to be as good without Amon-Ra St. Brown in there.
We've got a comment in here that it's the AFC South is the Jags division. I tweeted about this. It's not really injury related, but the Jaguars have been playing Darius Williams in the slot so far this season, which when they signed Darius Williams and when I was kind of getting reports out of training camp that Darius Williams was playing in the slot, that it surprised the hell out of me because Darius Williams in his career before joining the Jaguars only played in the slot for about 4% of defensive snaps. He's already played more snaps this season for the Jaguars than he did in all of his time with the Los Angeles Rams. And he's grading out at like a 32.1 PFF grade in coverage right now. So I was looking into it to see, who the Eagles slot receiver for this game could be, because that would be a pretty decent fantasy play, DFS play. And they kind of vary their slot snaps between Quez Watkins. You've got Devontae Smith. You've got A.J. Brown. You also have Dallas Goedert playing in the slot a little bit. But the most productive slot receiver for the Eagles so far this season has been Devontae Smith. And, Darius Williams and Devontae Smith, two kind of slimmer guys, you could certainly see that being a matchup. So at least in one DFS lineup, I've got a stack of Jalen Hurts and Devontae Smith. I kind of like the Devontae Smith play maybe even a little bit more than A.J. Brown this week.
Yeah, I like that too, because I do like what Mike Caldwell, the new DC in Jacksonville, has done up front. I like them adding Arden Key, and they've used him how I think they should, a little bit outside, a little bit inside. Javon Walker, the first overall pick, looks good. I think Josh Allen, the edge rusher Josh Allen, is kind of budding into a top 10, top 15 edge rusher. But if there's one team with an offensive line that can negate that, it's probably the Philadelphia Eagles. And so maybe they can then pick apart the secondary. But yeah, it is interesting. I mean, Tyson Campbell, the second-round pick from last year, played a lot in the slot last year, if I remember correctly. So, pushing him back on the outside probably makes sense. He's a bigger physical guy from Georgia. But yeah, Darius Williams, I think we see a 5'8", 5'9" guy in a assumed slot. That's not where he won in Los Angeles. And they gave him a solid contract. You'd think you're going to give a guy, 3 years, about $30 million. You probably play him where he's been thriving for several years.
Yeah, it was odd. Like, as you mentioned, I mean, Darius Williams is only 5'9", 180, something like that. But Jalen Ramsey played along the slot. Other guys played in the slot there in that Rams defense. And, I mean, yeah, I don't know. It hopefully for his sake and for the Jaguars' sake and everything, he can turn that around. He can start playing better in the slot. Maybe he can get used to it a little bit more because he does have the body type, but the success has not been there so far. Let's talk about the Buccaneers-Chiefs game. We've got Chris Godwin and Julio Jones, both reportedly game-time decisions. Those guys both questionable to play against the Chiefs. So this could be depending on whether those guys play or not, at least Tom Brady's going to have Chris Evans and Mike Evans this week, but could be another slog for Tom Brady in that offense.
Tom Brady getting Captain America on his team.
I know.
The guy gets everyone. It's so unfair. No,
or the Bengals running back.
Had to be done.
or the Bengals running back, Chris Evans.
That's true. That's true. It's a double. Yeah. Chris Evans can go both ways. I think I'd rather have Captain America on my team. Like you said, it can swing the game. It's going to be huge. I mean, even Russell Gage is still not 100%. They just cannot stay healthy. But we probably should see some Cole Beasley this week. Against a Saints defense that is playing much better, but still can be picked apart a little bit. If you can hold up with the offensive line. So, I know you have some thoughts on that game, but yeah, they just cannot get healthy at receiver, and they need it. I mean, that offense did not look good against the Packers.
Yeah, I was checking out PFF's best bets before we started the show, and we've got a pretty significant edge on the Buccaneers being favored by 1 point, by the Buccaneers money line, which is only minus 111 right now, and then also the edge on the over at 45.5 points. This game's in Tampa. I mean, fans are going to be fired up for this one because the game was actually allowed to stay in Tampa despite Hurricane Ian, which obviously ripped through that area. So fans are definitely going to be jazzed up for that one. And the Chiefs have been good this season, but they're also coming off a loss to what looked like the lowly Indianapolis Colts for the first 2 weeks of the season. So the Chiefs are certainly beatable. And yeah, I do. I kind of like the Buccaneers in this game.
Yeah, no, I totally understand it, and I trust me, when I go against Green Line, I try it every once in a while. It rarely goes well. So I think I see what they're seeing there, though, as well. I think the Chiefs were massive favorites on the road last week. To make them big favorites again is probably a bit of a miscalculation there. So Tampa, it's a big get right game for them as well.
Couple other bets that Green Line likes in this game is actually Patrick Mahomes under 1.5 passing touchdowns, and also Tom Brady under 1.5 passing touchdowns. So those could certainly be interesting bets as well. Let's get into a game that I know that you'll be paying close attention to, and that's the Bears and Giants. The Giants will still be without Wan'Dale Robinson and Kadarius Toney. The Bears will be without David Montgomery and Jalen Johnson. Velus Jones, the Bears rookie wide receiver, questionable for the first time this season. I think he had been doubtful and didn't play through the first 3 weeks of the season. So one thing I'm curious about in this game is who the Giants put out there at wide receiver, whether, we finally actually start to see Kenny Golladay getting more snaps, getting more targets out there, if it's going to continue to be Richie James and David Sills. What exactly is the plan there? But I know we talked about this a little bit on Wednesday. It's hilarious that one of these teams is going to be 3-1 after this weekend.
It really is, and I think it'll be more hilarious once we actually see the on-field product. It might look like a 1930s football game. They're both, some of the better running offenses so far this year. But yeah, they're both, I want to say, 31st and 32nd in sacks per dropback. The pressures they're actually allowing are near the top of the league as well. They're not missing a bunch of receivers. The Bears without Byron Pringle. Does sound like rookie Velus Jones Jr. should make his debut after being a full participant. I think the first time in his career he was a full participant in practice. Even with David Montgomery out, we saw Khalil Herbert last week for the Chicago Bears. 157 yards on the ground, 6 explosive rushes, 7 forced missed tackles on carries. The explosive rushes, the yards, and the forced missed tackles all led running backs last week. So I think it's going to be a not a shootout. Yeah, whatever a shootout is where you only run the ball. I don't even know what you call that. Because the defenses are both vulnerable. Leonard Williams not playing for the Giants is a big deal for their run defense, and the Bears just do not have that good of a run defense themselves. So I'll be paying attention. Unfortunately, I will be paying a lot of attention. Yeah.
It reminds me of, I know I already talked about this, but Bill Belichick's monologue at the top of his press conference today. He was basically talking about the invention of the passing game, and that does kind of it's apropos to this Bears Giants game where they're gonna have to reinvent the passing game or discover the passing game. They need Don Hudson in there. But one of the funniest things was that Belichick just drops players who played in the 30s their last names. So today he was like Hinkle, Isbell, Hutton. Who the hell knows who Hinkle is? I'm sorry, I'm not the NFL historian that Bill Belichick is, but I was just watching at home. I wasn't in Foxborough for that or anything, but I could just imagine everyone in there just desperately Googling who the hell is Hinkle, who played for the Green Bay Packers in the 1930s. But yeah, that might be reminiscent of what that Giants-Bears game looks like. Another interesting matchup, Bills-Ravens. You've got Gabe Davis questionable for this one. I believe that he told reporters that he will play in this game, but this has just been a pretty fun start to the season where you're seeing these contending teams go up against each other. And it's going to be really fun to see how the Bills and Ravens match up this week in general.
Yeah, it's really interesting to me. Not that I want to say you should bet on it, but the fact that Baltimore are 3-point home underdogs with all the injuries Buffalo has, they go out and sign Xavier Rhodes, their practice squad, the corner, and he now has a hamstring injury and is not expected to be available. So, Lamar's been incredible so far. Obviously, Josh Allen, and they've been good too. And the Ravens defense has some question marks. That being said, Jason Pierre-Paul, I believe, will make his debut for Baltimore this weekend. But no, I'm with you. I feel like there has been a lot of more early season marquee matchups, not within the division. This game should be awesome. Yeah,
and one note on that one. The Ravens will be down to their 4th left tackle once again in that game, or at least it looks like it. Patrick McCarry is doubtful with his ankle injury. I was told that since he's playing left tackle, and that injury I believe is to his left ankle, it's the back foot on his kickback at left tackle. So that's one of the reasons why the Ravens were going to be a little bit more cautious about it, be a little bit smarter about it. Maybe sit him out a week or two, make sure that he gets it right. But you're going to see Daniel Falele starting there at left tackle, most likely, unless they put Zach Johnson or one of their practice squad guys out there. But that's a really difficult matchup. You're probably going to have to see them putting, an extra tight end, maybe Josh Oliver or Patrick Ricard, one of those guys out there at left tackle to give him a little bit of help, because that's what we saw them do against New England on Sunday, where Dietrich Wise had 3 sacks in like 5 minutes of that game. They started putting some help out there, and Daniel Flaley calmed down a little bit. They were able to pull back the help a little bit. But, I mean, that Bills pass rush is significantly more difficult to defend than the Patriots pass rush is.
That is bad news, Bears. Yeah, with all due respect to Daniel Flaley, I mean, he was getting beat at the Senior Bowl when you and I were there fairly consistently on his pass protection sets. I mean, Von Miller, Carlos Basham, and Gregory Rousseau are currently top 10 edge rushers for us. So whoever is going up against him, it's going to be barbecue chicken. That is interesting. I thought Stanley maybe was going to be able to play. I know he missed practice today, I read that it was for rest.
Right. But, so he might actually be back. No, that's a good point.
That would be huge for the massive for the Ravens.
Yeah, I just completely glossed that over. But yeah, you're right that he was back at practice. I think one of the Ravens writers, maybe that was because he sat out of practice for rest. They also were considering the weather in that game, that maybe it wouldn't be best to put him out there right away. But no, that would definitely be massive if Ronnie Stanley can return for that game. And yeah, good call on that, because that's something that totally glossed over. Do you have any favorite bets for this week?
I do have a couple favorite bets for this week. So we haven't talked about, I think, either of these games. So the Browns, I like the Browns. You can either get the -1, maybe even get a money line depending where you're betting. They are going to, I think, run roughshod over the Atlanta Falcons defense. They have one of the worst run defenses in football. I want to say the worst in EPA per play allowed against rushes. And I like their defense to hold up. Obviously, a good secondary getting healthy now. Yeah, some questions. Can Myles Garrett play after he crashed his car? Can Jadeveon Clowney return? Those are questions, but I still like the Cleveland Browns in that game. The other play I like is the over in the Colts-Titans games. Yes, division games tend to go under. I want to say they're 15-1 to the under so far in division games. At the same time, when there's been that many unders in division games, maybe the number is a bit too low. But I also just like it. Kevin Byard did not practice today. Amani Hooker, I believe, is ruled out. So both of those great safeties for the Titans, I think, may not play in this game. They basically have no pass rush after losing Harold Landry. The Colts offense, starting to finally click a little bit, get healthy as well. So I like that play as well.
Yeah. Hey, am I missing something on that Browns-Falcons line? Like, why are the Browns only favored by 1 point? I know it's in Atlanta, but Browns have been good this season. Like, I know I'm waiting like everyone else is for like the floor to drop out on Jacoby Brissett and for him to return back to normal. But I mean, Browns have been good, and the Falcons, at least heading into the season, were thought to be one of the worst teams in the NFL.
I'm guessing it's the injury to Garrett. I mean, he's probably, like a TJ Watt where, most non-quarterbacks are not going to affect a spread. Garrett's probably a 1, maybe 1.5 point guy, which is why it's kind of below a key number of a field goal. But, I mean, hey, that's why I want to bet it. So I'm glad you see it the same way.
I am right there with you. All right. Well, I think that will do it for this week's PFF Wire, or today's PFF Wire. You just threw in a question here.
Real quick before we go.
Your thoughts on starting Goddard or TJ Hawkinson full PPR? I have the option to run them both. Kind of like Dallas Goedert, just because he does play in the slot a lot. And we mentioned Darius Williams struggled so far this season. What are your thoughts on this?
I would counter if they do throw linebackers on him. Devin Lloyd, the rookie first rounder for the Jaguars, has 4 pass deflections, 2 interceptions, a solid coverage grade, and then their big ticket free agent acquisition, Foyesade Oluokun, also a decent coverage player. So, yeah, I mean, I actually like both. But I think because of the injuries in Detroit and Seattle's secondary being maybe the worst in the NFL, I would lean Hawkinson. But, yeah, I agree with you. You probably can't go wrong.
Yeah, no, I think that both of those are good choices. And, yeah, certainly the injury to Amon-Ra St. Brown should help TJ Hawkinson get a few more targets out there, though I'm kind of questioning how efficient that offense will be over. But I'm like the biggest Amon-Ra St. Brown fan in the world. I shouldn't be, because I traded him away in Dynasty like right before he went off last season. Fortunately, and this is going to be a daily segment of like all of my worst mistakes in fantasy. That is definitely among them. I feel better though, because the person I traded him to immediately flipped him to someone else. So like we're on like multiple degrees of bad trades of Amon-Ra St. Brown, and at least I'm not the latest one. But yeah, 1,000% should have kept him. All right. Well, I think that will do it for today's PFF Wire. Keep it on PFF.com for all of your news and analysis. Download the PFF app. Subscribe to PFF plus $79.99 a year. Follow Brad on Twitter at PFF_Brad. Follow me on Twitter at Doug Kyed, as I mentioned off the top. If you don't want to watch us on YouTube, if you would prefer to drive around and listen to us, make sure to subscribe on Apple, on Spotify to the PFF Wire podcast, and leave a review if you do or don't like what you're listening to. Just still give us a good review, because that's just,
why not?
like, there's no reason to be
What's the
mean.
downside?
Yeah. Just, I don't know. Put us on someone else or something like that. All right, well, we'll do it. So we will talk to you guys again on Monday. Happy watching football this weekend.